in this lesson, we'll take a look at using panel loops to create some teeth for our little worm character. So there are a bunch of different ways that we could add teeth to this guy. I want to have these sort of long, flat teeth. We could, bring in a cube shape and morph it to fit, but we'll use a little bit different technique. So let's jump in, and I'm going to go to Plane 3D, and let's turn on our polyframe. Go to Initialize, and let's start to change the divisions here. So I want to dial these H divisions down, and I'm going to set that to 8. And actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I think I want to have 8 teeth, so I'll set it to 9. There we go. And let's take the V divide down all the way down to 3. Okay, so we end up with something like this. Now let's go ahead and make that a poly mesh. And let's import this or append it into our Z tool. So we'll come in here, go to Subtool, let's append, and let's append our new plane here. We'll select the plane, and let's move it up into position. So we can use move here, or we can use our deformation, and we want to offset it actually in the Y here. Move it up into position, and then in the Z, move it kind of forward a little bit. Okay, now I want to use the move brush with symmetry on in the X. So activate symmetry, the X. And now I want to start to shape this a little bit. So I want to take these endpoints and move them back. You may have to adjust your brush size a little bit. So we have just a very little bit of geometry that we have to worry about here. So it's pretty straightforward as far as moving this. I want to move these points in here, kind of move these in a little bit. Kind of a smaller draw size. And catch this point right on the end here and bring that in. Same thing down here. Just kind of do a little bit more shaping on this so that it fits inside our character's mouth. I'll come in here. Now we haven't, finished sculpting the character yet, so there's a lot of detail that we have yet to add. But we'll get these sort of teeth built in and then kind of sculpt around them. I want to kind of create a nice little angle in here, so I'll come in and I can smooth that out and then kind of pull that back and in. Same thing here, kind of pull this back a little bit. Maybe pull it up a little. And we just want to space them out so that, thinking about each one of these as a tooth, we just want it to be a similar width. All right, so something like that. I want to create a little bit more difference here as far as the angle, so I'll kind of bring that out a little. Pull those teeth back a little bit towards the face here. I want to create something really exaggerated. Kind of smooth that a little bit. Okay, so let's say that we'll call this good. Say this is kind of the configuration that we want our teeth to take. Okay, so how do we separate these out? Well, let's isolate this, so we'll solo that out. The first thing I want to do is separate each one of these polygons into its own polygroup. So we can go to polygroups, and if we group by normals, you can see that we have the maximum angle set. If we dial this down a little bit, we can start to get all these separated. Now these are separated into top and bottom, so this will allow us to come in. I can hide, oops, let me go ahead and get the select rectangle. I can now hide this and group that. Same thing here. I can group that together. So the idea is to create a different polygroup for each one of these teeth. Okay, so grab the green, Control W to polygroup it. just making sure that all these are separate. Okay. And just having these as different colors is going to help us just visualize this a little bit better. So we want all these to be different polygroups. Now we want to create a thick piece of geometry for each one of these polygons. Before we do that though, I'm going to subdivide this one time, and I'm going to turn off the smooth modifier here. So we'll subdivide it once, and that will give us these 4 polygons. So we need to have a little bit more resolution in there, but you can see they're still part of the same subtools. Now let's jump up, and under geometry again, we're going to go to edge loop, and here we're going to come down to panel loops. Now, so what panel loops are going to do are going to create raised beveled pieces of geometry for each polygon, each polygroup rather. So we want to create teeth out of this. So we want to have double-sided geometry, so we'll choose panels double-sided. We can choose the number of loops, and we can choose the thickness. So we'll give it a little bit more thickness, and we can test this and see how it looks. I want to turn the polish down so that it stays nice and sharp here. And then we also have the bevel amount. The elevation, I'm going to set that down to 0. So it'll be kind of halfway from the middle where this is, instead of all coming out from the base. And let's go ahead and create panel loops. Now you'll notice it says we can't do it with multiple subdivision levels, so we'll go ahead and delete our lower level. And we'll create panel loops. Now you can see it's created extra geometry here. It's created a thickness, and it created sort of a bevel, but it's separated each one of those polygroups into its own sort of tooth shape. Okay, they're all kind of right next to one another. Now you can change the thickness of that if you want to. If you want to make that a little bit thicker, you can undo that, change the thickness, increase that thickness a little bit, run panel loops again. Changing the number of loops will change the number of loops here, as you see. And you can also, if you want to decrease the bevel amount, you can make it a little bit sharper, so something like that. Okay, we can also come in here if we want to kind of sharpen up the lines in here. We can use the slice curve to do that. So just coming across here, creating a slice across the bottom and across the top there. Now let's go down to our polygroups, and let's do an auto group. And that'll basically group each one of these teeth into a single polygroup. So the advantage of this is that we can now, even though this is part of the same subtool, we can modify these separately. So let's go ahead and use move. We've got transpose selected. I'm going to go into the brush, and under the modifiers, I'm going to turn the, actually we'll go ahead and just use the masking on this instead of under the modifier. So we'll go under auto masking right underneath that, and here we'll choose mask by polygroups. So what that will do is allow us to come in, let's say with move, and you can see that I'm only working with that single polygroup. So whatever I do, whatever I click on, it's only affecting that single polygroup. So that'll allow me to kind of add a little bit of detail to this. So we'll turn off polyframe. Let's also take away the solo of this. And so now what we can do is come in and start to manipulate these. So come to rotate. We can kind of rotate the base of that back in, and if we want to make it a little bit shorter, we can do that. We'll draw it out from here. Kind of make that a little bit shorter. We want to kind of break it up a little. So coming in here and having that auto masking really helps us to kind of not have to worry about affecting the other teeth. Okay, so we can really create some interesting effects. We can come here and grab maybe this bottom tooth and kind of rotate it in a little bit. Grab this top one, rotate it out. We don't have to worry about masking these because we're using the auto masking. Otherwise we could mask them out. But they're not separate subtools. We're not having to switch subtools, and we're able to just come in here and really, really quickly place these teeth where we want them to be. Okay, we'll kind of bring it a little bit of an angle here. kind of bring this one out and bring this one in. Same thing here. Add a little bit more of a gap towards the back and have the teeth sort of touching a little bit here at the front. Just kind of break those up so you get kind of a cool look. But having those as separate subtools and then using auto masking, you could also, if you've got the move brush selected, whatever brush you have selected, you can go, and the auto masking here is still on. So I can just grab this, and normally I'd be moving everything that's within that radius, but here I'm only moving the first polygroup that I've clicked on. That makes sense. All right, so panel loops are great for kind of hard surface pieces. You can create raised panels for things like automobiles, things like that. So, but here we've used it to create some teeth really quickly just by building out a base that's in the shape that we want, making the polygroups, and then making those using panel loops to separate out those teeth with thickness. So the next thing that we want to do is to take a look at the topology tool. So we kind of talked about remeshing, but there are other ways to actually recreate a new topology with a little bit more control. So we'll talk about that process in the next lesson.